How are people doing? Have a little bit of conversation.
Doing okay here. How about you?
I'm good. I've been working on a giant painting that is the biggest one I've ever worked on yet. So it's
Oh,
been fun.
wow.
Yeah. Okay. And as always with my art, it's a big hamsa. So I stick with the theme. We'll wait for until like 12:05. How about that? Okay. 12:05. So let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Crichlow Silva. I am the program director for Tri-Faith, and you are joining us today for a crucial conversation on religion, civil life, or civic life and civic engagement. This is purposefully planned right before a city election in Omaha. So if you're in Omaha and haven't voted yet, make sure that you do tomorrow. Polls open at 8 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. So just want to give you that information as that's a pretty on point for what we're going to be discussing today. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. Okay. Are we all good? Do we see the presentation? Thumbs up? Awesome. Okay. So crucial conversations, we'll get into what they are a little bit. So this is a way for all of us to come together and discuss those different aspects of relationship as they pertain to our everyday life. So how does religion and our religious identities inform how we interact with society, or how does society impact our religious understandings and our own religious identities? So first, thank you all for coming today. I appreciate that. I hope that we have some really meaningful discussions today around what it looks like to have religion and civic life together. And we'll go over some ground rules as well. This is pretty standard. You don't need to read them in depth. I'll just go over them real quick. Basically, let's make sure that we take turns talking with each other and work on not interrupting. I know that's difficult on Zoom. So if you need to use the raise hand function, we'll do that. And please try to refrain from dominating conversation to make sure everybody has a turn in the conversation. And we're going to be speaking from personal statements as opposed to generalizations. And then, no proselytizing. We try not to do that at Tri-Faith. We're welcoming of all beliefs and want to make sure that this continues to be a safe space for folks. And then also active listening and not attacking or blaming a different participant for a viewpoint that you may not agree with. And so first we're going to get started with just some basic information around civic life and religion. And first, does anybody want to give what they feel like their definition of civic life is? Feel free to just unmute.
I feel like
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I just was gonna say I feel like I don't know exactly, but it has something to do with voting and paying taxes.
I was going to be a little more theological about it and say that it's something about community of people working together through institutions and procedures towards the common good.
Anne?
I agree with Laura. I think it's civic life. I understand Jeremy, thinking it's taxes and laws and all that, but it's more than that. It's our life in our community and what we can do in our community that is apart from our religion.
Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay, so this is how I define civic life. It is political and non-political engagement of groups and individuals to protect public values and to make change within a community. So that's kind of the shared definition that I'm hoping that we bring to this conversation. It has everything to do with what Anne, Laura, and Jeremy all mentioned. Paying part of those property taxes and taxes in general is part of it. Especially if we think about public education, that's my biggest point in civic life engagement is probably public education. If some of you may know that I was on the Omaha Public Schools Board of Education, so that took up a lot of my time and a lot of my engagement within the community. So that is a lot of where I'm coming from. And how are we feeling about this definition? Does it make sense to everybody? Do we need any more clarification? See nodding, awesome. Okay. And then do you all want to just kind of take turns in describing what are some examples of civic life and engagement for you? Because it all looks different for each individual. Remember, this is called Crucial Conversations, so there's supposed to be conversation.
Okay, pandemic specific, going and getting vaccinated.
That's a wonderful example. I see Paul and Abdul are unmuted.
Yes,
Green.
sorry. What was the question? I had to just step out.
Just some examples of civic life and engagement in your own personal life.
Well, like to participate in affairs of municipality, provincial affairs, as well as the federal. So my understanding of civic engagement is to be conscious of what policies are being promulgated, right to vote, participate in discussions that can make life better for the citizens.
Absolutely.
And Amanda, I unmuted myself to just append something to the previous comment about it's not just getting vaccinated perhaps, but also talking about with other people about the benefits or why not someone would be vaccinated. So it's engaging that conversation beyond our individual choices would be a way of extending that previous comment as well.
Thank you. Anybody
mobilizing
else?
and becoming active, getting out the vote, helping those who can help themselves, advocacy.
Awesome. So here are some examples. Once again, just reminding you all to vote. Um, so elections, that's probably the one that people think of the easiest when we think about our civic engagement. And then things like neighborhood associations, they can have positive and negative effects on a community, but that is still trying to uphold some sort of value within that community that they have, with shared collective action, I should say. Advocating for school curriculums. That's another form, especially within public schools, where a majority of our students are being educated. And then community organizing and protest activism, stuff like that. So those are just some examples of what I have included as civic engagement and civic life. Does anybody want to add anything else to that? No? Cool. So first, I don't normally go into any type of scripture in my type of programs. I kind of focus more on that social aspect. But this one, I decided to kind of look to see what the different, what Judaism, Christianity, and Islam say about community, because that's what this whole thing is. This could have been titled Religion and Community as opposed to civic engagement in civic life. But if somebody could read this first passage, this is actually from the Talmud, I would appreciate that.
I'll read it. A Talmud Ha'am Torah scholar is not allowed to live in a city that does not have these 10 things: a Beit Din, law court, that meets out punishments; a tzedakah, charitable fund that is collected by 2 people and distributed by 3; a synagogue, a bathhouse, mikveh, a bathroom, a doctor, a craft person, a bloodletter, some versions add a butcher, and a teacher of children.
So what community needs are being met by these 10 items?
Health, food, law,
Toilet.
Yeah.
Hygiene.
Education,
Personal hygiene.
education, and with the law court, enforcement of law.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Art, maybe? Is it craft? What is it? How do we define a craftsperson here?
I think
And the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the wood carvers, those making furniture, making the goods that are used in the community.
mhm.
It could be art also, because art and music being part of art is something that enriches our lives. And that's important in a community.
Mhm.
And the charitable fund takes care of those that need care, that aren't able to at this time or any time.
Correct. And then this one is from Christianity. If somebody would like to read this passage from Acts.
I can do that if you want.
Sure.
They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Now, is this pertinent to their own community, or to the larger community that is generally conceived in terms of civic life, the public sphere.
Right.
But with that question, I'll close.
Yeah, well, I think that's the question that we're hoping to get at is how does this example uphold community values, and who does that extend to? That is up for discussion.
Caring for neighbors, for people.
Mhm.
Or does it fall into, it depends on who you talk to? Because some Christian communities are known for being more insular than others, and they see the community as smaller than others do.
Do
I-
we?
I'll add something too really quick. Just that I think something I struggle with is, you know, I think the goal is to help everybody, but I think there's a lot of value in focusing on the piece that we can do, right? That like focusing on literally your next door neighbors has a lot of value, because if everyone does it, then people are taken care of, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I think both of these passages, we'll get to Islam in a second, but I think that both of these passages could be for both insiders and outsiders of the religion, right? It depends on how you want to interpret it as an individual. But we'll move on to Islam. And if somebody would also read this one, please.
I can read it.
Okay, thank you.
A believer to another believer is like a building whose different parts support each other. The prophet then clasped his hands with the fingers interlaced while saying that, and this is reported in Bukhari, the book of saying of the prophet. He also said, the believers in their mutual kindness, compassion, and sympathy are just like one body. When one of the limbs suffers, the whole body responds to it with wakefulness and fever. And this is recorded in two books of Bukhari and Muslim.
So what does this say about values, about community values with Islam?
It is open to all believers. It doesn't define. It's, it defines Zayat believer, but it's open to the, whole society, whole community.
Yeah, I think in some ways similar to the other two, there's a little bit of an open question of whether this is only those within that particular community. It means believers, with basically believers within the Islamic community. Or, what can that mean to some extent, at least a porousness to the outside, which I think is the other two, in particular, the last one that we read also have that question.
Mm-hmm.
No, this one here applies to the whole community. The whole community. So the Quran that defines people as believers and non-believers. So this is open to everybody in the community.
Well, this particular passage referred to the believers, but there are a number of others, like one of them says, that person is known among us from the believing community unless if the neighbors go hungry. Speaks to the humanity in general, number of other verses in the Quran as well.
I think those words are beautiful. They're
Yeah.
beautiful. And where it says the believers in their mutual kindness, compassion, and sympathy, etc., are just like one body. It doesn't say that it's just people that believe a certain thing. That's the way I'm interpreting it. And I think this is one of the most beautiful things I've read in a long time.
Yeah, there were a lot of passages that I could have picked, and then this one I thought that that was also very beautiful, and that imagery of one body and us being one body was one of the things that I found really, really beautiful in this.
Amanda, I think all three of these talk about concern for the neighbor and mutual support. And so they all share that, however we define the range of the community. And that I think is extremely valuable. Yeah, that image of the body is also one that you could have chosen instead of the passage from Acts. There are passages about, each person is a different part, a limb of the body, and they bring different gifts to the community. And I think all three of these passages illustrate that in different ways.
So those are my next sets of questions, is what do we have in common as Jews, Christians, and Muslims when we view community together?
I think one of the emphasis is community is important in all three. Without it, you don't have your needs met.
At the same time, all three do there is a difference between being part of the narrowly construed community and being part of the just general public sphere, that since these are all religiously defined, we have to think about how the values, the intra-community values, extend beyond a particular religious community. All three religious traditions do that, but that doesn't mean that everybody is treated equally by all three, which is one of the challenges that Tri-Faith is trying to confront.
Yep. Lisa, you have your hand up?
Yes, I agree with what Paul was just saying, and I guess I need to look at the Jewish or the the thing that you had. Yeah, it says a Torah scholar. What I think, and I agree with Paul. He's talking about these are really the differences are that the Jewish one in particular deals with, in particular, a Torah scholar is not allowed to live in a city that does not have these 10 things. So these are the things that will allow you to fulfill being Jewish. A Beit Din, which is not a court down in Douglas County, it's a Jewish court. Tzedakah, of course, you don't know if it's charitable just among this group of Jewish scholars or Torah scholars, or if it means a general rule or the general community. Mikvah, of course, just deals with Judaism. So it's kind of interesting. I think each one deals with the believers of their own faith, the community of those believers. And I think what Paul is saying is that, we need to look at how do we have these issues, these values stretch out to the general community as well. Paul said it better.
I think it raises another question. We were talking, I was taking someone on a tour, and Imam Jamal and I were talking about Sharia law and marriage versus civic law and marriage. And how do those two things harmonize? And how do we as communities of faith have conversations about, does one take priority over the other, and how do we coexist, knowing that we have some allegiance to our individual covenants as religions next to our civil covenants as neighbors.
Well,
and whether we want to focus on what is similar or what is different. I think that also really frames our perspective on either one. Do we want to celebrate our similarities, or do we want to celebrate our differences?
That kind of gets into my next slide. And so I think the important thing, when we look at religion in juxtaposition of civic life and civic engagement is that it allows the individual to bring their religious identity to the forefront. So those passages that could be used by an individual to show why it's important for them to engage in different acts of service or being engaged politically, things like that. So I want us all to kind of start thinking about the pros and cons of religion and the intersection of religion and civic engagement. So there definitely, I think, are pros. There, to me, there's that community organizing bit. You have a built-in community that will help you achieve your goal. And then there are also cons because it's limiting in whose voices are heard. So with that, oh, nope, I forgot this. So there's a Pew study from 2019 about civic engagement and happiness within communities. And they did it with 3 groups: actively religious, inactive, and unaffiliated. And so, let's see. These are just different factors into what makes somebody happy. And so their conclusion was, although there's, I believe they gave a caveat that there wasn't a ton of data to suggest, to really make these correlations, but the more religiously active you are, the happier that you were, a person is or a community is. And so this shows their findings. And that's just a little bit of that. And so now we're going to break into the small groups. I am going to put these questions in the chat, but if somebody, the easiest way probably to do this is to copy and paste them from the chat so that you have them in front of you into a different document. And on the side, there isn't a lot of easy ways to do this one. But first, when we break into our small groups of about 5 or 6 people, just introduce yourselves, state where you're from, and if you have a particular religious affiliation. The next question is, what public values do you wish to uphold? And then how do you engage within civic life to uphold those values? When religion is added, whose voice is being heard? And then whose is being left out? And this comes to participation, this last part, and how can other voices be heard? And what's your role in making sure that either your own values are being heard, and what's your role when it comes to having other people's values being heard as well? So let me go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, so I'll give you all a few moments to get that, to get those questions, reread them, ask any questions. Does anybody have any questions about these particular questions at first? Okay, let's see, we have 21 participants. So we'll do. I'm gonna break you out. Okay, believe we're in our own breakout group. Let's see here. Oh, nope. Okay. Coming back, coming back. Cool. Anybody found anything interesting from your small group that you'd like to share? Lisa nodded her head. Want to go? No.
I don't want to monopolize. We had a lovely man, Abdul Hal Patel from Canada, from Toronto. So it was quite interesting to get some interaction about what was going on in Canada. I don't want to add too much because I don't want to monopolize. And I think Sarah and Wendy, of course, who can speak much more eloquently, but I just thought it was a wonderful conversation. It was just interesting. We needed more time, Amanda.
Always need more time, huh? Especially when there's lots of questions. Anybody else? I have one final question, but does anybody else have anything that they'd like to share?
I was just wondering if is Abdul, I know there's a tri-faith in Toronto, and I wonder if he's connected with that. That'd be
No, I didn't
interesting
know.
to know.
No, I didn't know there was one in Toronto because I am involved in a lot of interfaith work for the past, especially 25 years more since 9/11. Yeah.
Welcome.
But, I would love to be connected. I'll look it up unless you can send me the information.
I just remember in the beginning when you were looking about tri-faith and we were unique in Omaha. And then I think I saw it one time when I was up in Canada. It's like, wow, there's another tri-faith. Didn't know that there was another one. So don't know much more.
Now, we have a number of multi-faith bodies, and I'm part of one that's the oldest multi-faith organization, known as Ontario Multi-Faith Council. We have about 32 different faiths. And initially we were focused more on chaplaincy because government asked us to do that under an MOA to ensure access to spiritual and religious care in government institutions, hospitals, jails, senior homes, etc. But in our discussion, I think one of the last points made is how religion is playing a part in civic engagement. And I think that needs a little more discussions because in many circles here in Canada, now religion is sort of separated or reduced to spirituality. And there is this native spirituality, no doubt about that. But even the mainstream religions are now saying, are you spiritual? But I'm spiritual, but not religious. And in many forums, when I asked the question, especially to students, how many are people of faith? And very few hands will go up. Mostly the people of no faith, or they have grown up culturally in one faith family.
Yep. I think that's a phenomenon we see across the board in all countries almost.
But
So
Amanda, you
Yeah.
can be spiritual, and that can be your main focus without being dogmatically religious.
Absolutely.
And Paul, you can jump in with what you explained, that there's no such big word as, what you had said about religion.
I think Amanda has heard this before. What I said was the question was problematic because it presumes that religion is a single thing, and it is not. No, religion as such does not exist. There are religious values, there are religious communities, there are religiously active persons, religious institutions. And so the impact of religion on society or civic life is extraordinarily variable depending on which one of the values or which one of the leaders or which one of the communities is speaking. Some of it is very protective of civility in civic life, and some of it is exclusivist and hostile to civil life and civic life. But is that what you're getting at, Anne?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I purposefully leave those really, 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 really broad to allow room for people to interpret it how they want to or how they view it. So my one last question is, we could argue that even though we're made up of 3 different faith traditions and people of a variety of other faith traditions, the tri-faith community is. But we could argue that we're a faith community of ourselves, right? So what would be some of those public values that we as people who are interested in tri-faith would want to uphold, and that we could maybe do some advocacy around? So as staff, we can kind of say what we think that we should focus on as advocacy, but I'm interested to know what, based off of the values that bring you here today and make you a part of tri-faith, what do you think those activities would be?
Non-discrimination.
Social justice.
Can you expand upon social justice? Is that the pretty?
Social justice, we can say, extends to many parts of the community, that we can look after our own in different ways, helping each other. Even that includes civic engagement, that we can have proper policies and laws governing the community for their benefit, for healthy living.
Anybody else? Well, I think some of the things that are on our plate is really focusing on racial justice and religion. That intersection is becoming even more important for us as an organization. And then we just put on a brief pause an interfaith COVID task force that did a lot of education around COVID and vaccines and making sure that people were safe, particularly in South Omaha. So those are some of the things that we've been working on. And as was brought up, that Karen brought up, getting vaccinated is a form of civic engagement. And then as Paul followed up, also educating people around vaccines is very important, whether you brought that in religiously or not. Anything else before we conclude?
I'm curious if anyone thinks that any one of the Abrahamic religions promotes a single lens of advocacy or justice work. Do you, as a Jew or a Christian or Muslim or whatever you identify as, think that one part of civic engagement is more important than another? The orphan, the widow, the environment. I don't know. Is there a first choice?
I think care for the poor is a priority in most of Christianity.
I was like going to say, as a Christian, just dismantling capitalism in general.
Well,
Yeah.
definitely all three. Oh, Abdul.
I'm sorry, the poor, the needy, obviously. But I think they're all, equally valued, though. I mean, you can't have, one that is, tier 1A or tier 1B. I think, to have a good society, all have to be addressed, equally and promoted equally and fought for equally.
Very good.
Did you have anything else to add, Paul?
Oh, no, I think I agree with that. I was going to say, mention the 4 C's. In terms of values, behaving with civility, whether we're in conversation, cooperation, or true collaboration, because those are kind of different levels of engagement within the public sphere and in an interfaith and interreligious context. So civility in conversation, civility in cooperation, and civility in collaboration to actually get things done. But
what about with conflict?
Civility in conflict. We can treat each other with respect, even when we profoundly disagree. And if we can't, we know what is around the corner, which is chaos, and that is bad for everybody.
Lots of C's in there.
Lots of C's.
Yeah.
It's the deep end of the sea.
Irene was unmuted for a minute. Did you have something to say?
No, people already said that, taking care of poor and the strangers in your land.
Yeah. That's why I didn't go with one of those passages, because those were pretty common that we could pull up from our heads, right? Anything else? I hope that this was really engaging, and I hope that people in Omaha remember their election. I've said it 3 times now. I've heard that you need to repeat things 7 times before people remember, but I'll stop at 3, okay? And so with that, that's what I have for you today. I am so thankful that you all joined us, and I hope that you learned something from your neighbors today, and that you continue to participate with Tri-Faith.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.